Hello everybody, my name's Ray, and as per the name, I love to read. Hello everybody, so welcome back to the channel, and if you're new here, welcome. It was only a week ago that I was talking about the long list for the International Booker Prize 2025. And we've got another long list out, so what a treat. It's the Women's Prize long list that was announced this morning. And again, we have 16 books. And this time I'm a bit more familiar with some of the offerings. On the list, there are 2 books that I've actually read. I say actually, I do read. There are 3 books that I already owned when the list came out. And there may be a couple more that have been added to my pile since having a read through. So I'm going to take you through them all and let you know my immediate reactions. Obviously, I've got more to say about some of these books than others, because obviously some of them I've heard about and I've been looking forward to. A couple of them I actually have finished, and some of them I've even talked about on the channel before. I can't wait to tell you my thoughts, and please share yours in the comments. I would love to know what you're all thinking. Have you read any of these? Are you excited to read any of them? And if you could pick just one, which one would you read? First and foremost, The Safekeep by Yael van der Wouden. I absolutely adored this book. It was one of my favourite books last year. So The Safekeep is a book that I don't want to give too much away going into it, but it's about a woman who is looking after the family home, as it were. She lives there more or less by herself, although her brothers do come by and visit, and she's looking after the things that belonged to her parents who are no longer with her. One day, her brother brings a girlfriend to meet the siblings, and they do not hit it off. The girlfriend then decides that she would like to stay in the family home with the sister who's been obviously living there, looking after it, while the brother is away on, I don't know, business. I can't remember why he was away. But anyway, so it ends up with the 2 women in the house, and they couldn't be more different from each other. I'm going to stop there because it's just better going into this book knowing as little as possible. And one of my friends said that if you live in certain countries, so if you're kind of living in the US or in the UK, you'll probably have a different reading experience than if you've lived in a country. Again, I don't want to give away too much, but this is a great book, and I remember when I first read it, there were a few moments where I got goose pimples, my blood ran cold, and I've been told that obviously there are certain people who would see where this was going from the get-go, depending on where they've grown up. But I don't want to give away exactly because otherwise I'll be giving hints, and I don't want to spoil anybody's reading experience if it's the first time you've read it. But this book really moved me. A fellow booktuber once described it as a bit cringe, and I still haven't forgiven him for it. But this was a truly lovely book, gorgeous writing, and honestly, it's a very short book, and I would recommend everybody pick it up. I am going to safely say I'm hoping that this one will make the shortlist. A book I'm not sure whether it'll make the shortlist because it's very Marmite, so either you're going to love this book or you're going to hate it. I loved it and I hated it, so big respect for this book. I almost gave it 5 stars before I docked it to 4 because it was such an unpleasant experience in a lot of ways. I found the main character to be very entitled, she behaved in ways that I absolutely wouldn't endorse. But on the other hand, it was fantastically written and it was gloriously filthy in a way that not many books are brave enough to be. And it said a lot about desire, it said a lot about marriage and particular people who aren't necessarily probably very suited to it. So yes, it was about a woman who goes, I can't remember why she was going on this trip, but she's planning to go from Los Angeles, I believe she starts off, to New York, and the plan is to go to New York for a few weeks and then come back. So she sets off on this big road trip, and instead of going to New York, she pulls off the motorway and goes to live in a motel. And then things get weirder from there. She makes some very interesting decisions, including some interior decorating and sex. Now, I can see why a lot of people wouldn't relate to this as the quintessential menopause, perimenopause experience. Certainly menopause and perimenopause are a theme within the writing. There is a lot about kind of expectations on women and relationships and the effect of kind of getting older and kind of the time that we have left and desire and how all of those kind of interplay with each other. And it's a fascinating book. I can absolutely see why it's on the long list, and it's one of those I disliked it in some ways, and it made me feel very sad and very kind of icky in the same ways that The Pisces by Melissa Broder did. But whereas with The Pisces, when I finished it, my instinct was to tell people not to read it because it had been quite upsetting and it just made me feel... I just wished I could unread it. I didn't get that with All Fours. I was glad I had the experience, but I don't think it's for everybody. So, fascinating book. I gave it 4 stars, but it was a high 4 stars. But also it was kind of 2 stars as well because I loved it and I hated it. It is such a paradox. Those are the 2 books that I have read that are on the list. I'm kind of team Safekeep. Was that Wallace and Gromit? I don't know what that was. So the books that I already had on my shelf, some deliberately and some not so deliberately. This book here, The Dream Hotel by Lailami, I received this the other day and this sounds fascinating, and when I read the blurb of this, because I forgot I'd ordered it and then it turned up and I was like, ooh, I was thinking about buying that again. Good job I didn't. But the synopsis for this is a woman is returning from a conference and she gets stopped at the airport and they detain her, saying that the content of her dreams shows that she's at high risk of imminently harming her husband or murdering her husband, and they have to keep her detained for a few weeks to, to keep an eye on her, to kind of settle down the situation. During the time that she spends in detention, apparently she meets a new resident and collision course with the very companies that have deprived her of her freedom. The blurbs on this list are keeping things very, very vague, which is good in a way because you don't want to ruin the story. Who knows what collision course this book will take? Who knows where it's heading? I love the premise. I love that it's got the word Kafka-esque on the front, and it's blurbed by Jennifer Egan, who I love. Apparently it's good. So yes, I'm looking forward to this one immensely. It looks like there's going to be kind of themes about technology, and how, although it can be making our lives easier, are we heading for a dystopian hell? That's the vibes I get from it, and I absolutely love this cover. Speaking of Wallace and Gromit, doesn't it remind you a little bit of the little hole that the penguin... No? Okay. Shush, Ray. Did I make any other notes about this book? Talking about the seductive dangers of technology and surveillance. So, it's going to be one of those thought crime, is technology going too far kind of speculative fiction type novels, I suspect. Another book that I already had was The Ministry of Time by Kaliane Bradley. I do love the shiny spine that we've got here. Did I buy this book because of its shiny spine? Quite possibly. I do like a shiny spine. This looks like it might be a bit of a romance. So a woman whose name is not mentioned gets a job looking after and gathering expats. It's not really explained in the blurb, but they're apparently people from the past, from time travel eras, and she is in charge of looking after a chap from the 1800s who the last thing he remembers was dying on an ill-fated mission to the Arctic. So he wakes up in modern times and doesn't take as long as expected to adapt to modern life. The person who is his kind of bridge, who's supposed to be helping him adapt to modern life, then develops a friendship. And from the synopsis that I read on the Women's Price website, it sounds like there's a bit of a romance going on. And certainly the top thing that says, a boy meets a girl, the past meets the future, a finger meets a trigger, the beginning meets the end. England is forever, England must fall. Can love triumph over the structures and histories that have shaped them? And how do you defy history when history is living in your house? It kind of sounds a little bit like it might have farce, but the cover looks serious. This looks like a serious book, despite the shiny cover. So yes, that one is one that I already had and hopefully will read quite soon. It was on my book of hardbacks that I bought as hardbacks that haven't been read yet. And the other one that I already owned in hardback, again another shiny cover, and this one's got nice edges as well. This is A Little Trickery by Rosanna Pike. This is the Goldsboro edition, and I believe it came as part of the Premier Book Club last year, which is a book club I'm no longer a part of because I ended up with too many books and I haven't read them yet. But yeah, so this one is, it looks like it's going to be a historical book. It's set in kind of medieval Tudor times, and it is about a character called Tib Ingleby, who is an orphan and a wanderer, and it's about her kind of journey surviving and travelling, meeting help along the way, meeting people who want to hurt her, and then she ends up gathering a group of friends, and they come up with an audacious plan, a kind of hoax, so to speak, that just gets completely out of hand. And it doesn't say what the nature of the hoax is. It just says her greatest trickery yet, which is presumably the little trickery that is alluded to in the title. So we've got a ragtag cast of characters and an unforgettable and distinctly unangelic heroine. And I love characters with a bit of nuance, so hopefully we'll have an interesting lead female character there. It wasn't one that, like I say, that the cover immediately drew me to, but now that it's been nominated, now that it's been longlisted, it may have shot up the pile a little bit. So that's that one. The book that I immediately went out and bought following its longlisting is this one here. It's called Fundamentally by Nussaibah Younis. And this book, I was told by a friend of mine who's done a bit of reading into it, was apparently kind of inspired by the story of Shamima Begum. So Fundamentally by Nussaibah Younis is about a woman called Nadia who goes and works in Iraq for the UN, rehabilitating ISIS women. And she meets a woman who ran away to join ISIS when she was only 15. And it's about how the two of them strike up a friendship and a rapport together. They find out that they've got things in common, and it doesn't say where the story goes. Again, it says a powerful friendship forms between the two women until a secret confession from Sarah, who's the younger girl, threatens everything Nadia has been working for. So I have no idea where this is going to go, but ever since I read Home Fire by Camilla Shamsi. I have been interested in the topic. I'm going to have a read of that. So that's all of the books that I have physically, but I did manage to snap up a copy of Nesting by Roisín O'Donnell on Kindle for 99p. That's a deal in the UK at the moment. I don't know whether that's going to last all month, but it was certainly worth snapping up for me. So this is a book about a mother running away from the family home with her 2 daughters. It doesn't say why she leaves home or why she makes that kind of split-second decision, but it does say in the blurb that she no longer feels that home is safe for her. And she ends up living in a hotel. Savings are running out, struggling to get kind of work. There's no family nearby, and it sounds like there's a lot of hardship in this book. It also sounds like it's a critique of the housing system, showing how difficult it is for people to get the housing that they need. And meanwhile, the husband, the father figure, is trying to kind of lure them back home. So it's, like I said, I don't know exactly why she makes the decision to leave, but it sounds like it's going to be one of those starting over books. Looks like it's going to be very literary. The cover certainly suggests it's going to be very literary. I think it's set in Ireland. Roisín O'Donnell's a Irish author. And yeah, it doesn't look like my typical sort of book, but I'm going to give it a go anyway at some point. I say at some point because obviously I've got all the international books to read as well, and I've got my little stack there that I have to prioritise because there just aren't enough hours in the day. I'm going to talk you through the rest of the books. I'm just going to warn you, I have tried to do a little bit of reading about these, but some of these blurbs are very, very vague, and I'm sure they're deliberately vague. I'm sure they just decided, let's make this as vague as possible, just put some vague thematic things, no plot points. So, I mean, it's easier to get excited about a book if it's got a decent premise, if it's got a premise that makes you think, oh, I wonder where this is going to go, I wonder what they're going to do with it. You know, like the Dream Hotel. It's a fascinating premise. You've got a good starting point there. Whereas if there's just a few key words, you know, this is an inspiring tale of friendship and friends, you know, it doesn't really give you that flavour of what you're going to expect. The next book I've got on the list, I'm just going to go through them in the order I've written them down, is a book called The Persians by Sanam Mahloudji. Now, this is a generational family drama that goes from 1940s Iran all the way into the 2000s, and it's difficult because there's lots of different characters that have been introduced. I think most of them are female, and again it's vague about the plot. It kind of tells you about who the characters are, but doesn't really tell you what happens to them in the synopsis. So from what I've gathered, there's the matriarch Elizabeth and 2 of her daughters who live in America, and 2 granddaughters as well, one of whom is in America, the other lives with grandma in presumably Iran. And after an annual vacation goes horribly, horribly wrong, Shirin, who is one of the daughters, has to get bailed out of jail by one of the granddaughters, and following on from that, there is a lot of gossip and scandal. Sounds like Shirin then goes on a grand quest to restore her family name, and yeah, that sounds like it's going to be, you know, the kind of main purpose of the plot. And whether or not this is good or not, whether or not I'll enjoy it, depends whether it's, I mean, it sounds like there's going to be entertainment there. The cover is funky. I do like the cover. It is the sort of thing that's eye-catching and I'd pick it up. Generational family dramas, I tend to shy away from them just because they span such a long period of time. And when it comes to kind of following a story and kind of taking it from start, middle to end and keeping invested in that arc, I find it harder to be invested in a generational drama than I do in a single kind of story pathway. But, you know, there are good ones. This one looks like it might be amusing, certainly if you've got kind of the daughter being arrested after during a family holiday, during a family get-together. Sounds like there's going to be hijinks. Yeah, goodness knows what she does to get arrested. I'm curious. So yeah, I'm a little bit curious about that one. It's a maybe. Next we have Dream Count by Chimimanda and Ngozi Adichie. This has one of the vaguest blurbs. The only thing I've read by this author is "We should all be feminists," which, yes, yes we should, which I loved and I thought it was fantastic. I particularly like the way they used the speech in that Beyonce song, Flawless. That was that was amazing. Loved it. And I've got a couple of her books. I've got Americana, I've got Half of a Yellow Sun, and I haven't read them yet. They are on the list. Modern classics. Haven't read them, haven't got round to it. But she's a very well-renowned author, and I wouldn't be surprised if this one makes the shortlist. This particular book is about a woman called Chiamaka, who is a Nigerian travel writer living in the US, and various people who are part of her life. So there's Zakera, who's her best friend and a successful lawyer. There's Omalafor, who is Chiamaka's cousin, who is a financial powerhouse, questioning how well she knows herself. And there's Chiamaka's housekeeper, Kadiato, who is raising her daughter in the US, who is apparently facing a hardship that will threaten all that she has achieved. And meanwhile, Chiamaka herself is reflecting on her life choices, past lovers, and regrets. You couldn't get a vaguer blurb than that. Who knows what any of these characters are reflecting about? And without a kind of hook, it's difficult for me to get excited. It's difficult for me to kind of get invested when there's not kind of a big plot carrot being dangled in front of me. More like a plot donut. A plot donut might get me... a plot donut might excite me a little bit more than a plot carrot. It might just be that the book isn't being sold to me in the right way, because again, you get there are loads of books that don't sound like much from the blurb, but then you read them and you just have this fantastic page-turning work. So I don't think it'll be the first book by Adichie that I'm going to pick up, because I've heard such great things about the other ones that I've got on my shelf, but I reckon that's going to probably make the shortlist, just as a guess. A book that does sound fascinating based on the premise is Birding by Ruane. I think I can read my handwriting there. I think it says Ruane. Anyway, yes, this is set in a mundane seaside resort, and it's a story about two women who are living their separate lives there. So you've got a lady called Lydia, who was a teen pop star in the 90s, who 30 years later, she's looking back at how she was treated in the kind of context of #MeToo and people coming out with their stories, and she's looking back and thinking, was that right? And during all of this, while she's doing all this kind of reflection, a famous former lover issues kind of a public apology, asking for forgiveness, and the way it's described in the blurb, and I love this phrase, the past is full of trapdoors she is desperately trying not to fall through. So that's one of the characters, and then the other character is called Joyce, and she is a middle-aged woman who has never left home and still lives with her mum, Betty, and they wear matching clothes and eat biscuits off bone china plates and dress up for G&T on a Saturday night together. It's all very quirky. They're known kind of locally as local oddballs, and she's kind of, I think, starting to have some realizations, and she starts to reflect as well. And it sounds like the themes of this book, and this is what it says in the synopsis. I'm saying this like this is my thoughts. This is what it says in the synopsis. The themes are kind of responsibility versus obligation, unhealthy relationships versus abusive ones, and how these women are dealing with having their wings clipped, basically. Are they going to meet? It's not clear, but they both sound like interesting characters that you want to know more about, having been told a little bit. Next on the list is Good Girl by Aria Aber. My handwriting is atrocious. I wrote some notes. I wrote them all down so that I could film on my phone without kind of reading off a laptop, but I've not done a very good job of this. Anyway, this is a book. This is a novel set in Berlin. Neela is finding escape in the clubbing scene in Berlin. It doesn't say exactly kind of what. I'm assuming this is modern times. And she meets an American literary figure called Marlowe Woods, who introduces her to the artistic scene and helps her realise dreams of kind of living an artistic lifestyle. As she gets pulled into his orbit, it reveals ugly tensions beneath the city's cosmopolitan veneer. Again, very, very vague plot-wise. It's not telling us exactly what this literary character is up to. Is he living some kind of seedy life that he's then kind of dragging her into, that's full of kind of, you know, dodginess? You know, what kind of artistic lifestyle are they living? I do not know much about club culture and techno in Germany. I don't know much about the party scene. My parties is, you know, a Pepsi Max. I'm not exactly living a party lifestyle anymore. So it won't be a living vicariously sort of read for me. And I just want to know a bit more about the plot. I want to know exactly, you know, what the dynamic is between these two characters. Whether it's going to be story or whether it's just going to be vibes, it's difficult to tell. I do like the cover though. This one has a fantastic cover, and I almost bought it today, but there wasn't a non-scruffy cover. There wasn't a non-scruffy version on the shelf, unfortunately. So maybe later. The next few have very, very vague, very, very vague blurbs as well. So I did a little bit more digging. So there's The Artist by Lucy Steeds. This is set in Provence in 1920, and the artist in question is a chap called Edouard Tartuffe, who is the uncle of Effie who lives with him. And the story is set with a journalist called Joseph who goes and tries to get to know the pair, insinuate himself into the household so that he can interview the great artist and make a name for himself. Effie, her purpose is, you know, cleaning his paintbrushes, looking after the home so that he can have the ultimate environment to be his best artistic self. I've just made a note that says there are secrets. What secrets? But I suppose they wouldn't be secrets if we knew about them going in. But it sounds like it's one of those kind of peculiar households. It's difficult to know what the atmosphere is going to be on this one, because I love it when you've got a stranger that then goes to a house and the atmosphere is a bit off and it's all a little bit creepy, a little bit something, you know, what's going on here, what are the undercurrents. I do like that kind of a setup, so it might work. I'll have to see what people are saying, because obviously a lot of these books are relatively, so if you look on Goodreads, they have relatively low numbers of kind of ratings and reviews, which is good because it means they're not just picking all the bestsellers, which is, it shows that they're having, you know, a proper think about it. The next one, which is called Somewhere Else by Jenni Daiches. This one only at the time of recording this only has 14 ratings and 6 reviews. So this is a very, very relatively unknown book. Although Miriam Margolyes has blurbed it. So, you know, if you've got Miriam Margolyes okaying it, then, you know, it's got to be good. Rosa Roshkin. She's 5 years old when her family are massacred in a pogrom, and she leaves everything behind except for a suitcase of clothes and her father's violin. And so obviously we've got a very kind of tragic setup there, and this is down as a generational novel as well. It sounds like it goes through both of the world wars, through the creation of Israel, the fall of the Berlin Wall. It states all of these as kind of landmarks during this story. So in the same way as the Persians is billed as a generational novel, it looks like this one's going to be as well, but this one sounds like it's going to be more somber in tone. It studies kind of identity and displacement and the Judeo-Scottish experience. So again, there isn't that much else in there, and not being a book that has a big reputation, it's difficult to know what to say or what to think about it. So I'm going to have to wait and find out what people are saying. But if you like your kind of generational novels, if you like your big topics, your historical events, it sounds like that's against the background of some very that's against a historical background. The next one on the list, we've got a few more to go, is Amma by Sariad de Silva. And this one is, again, it sounds like more of a generational novel. It starts in 1951 Singapore when 10-year-old Josephine kills her abuser, and it's about the ripples that causes throughout the family and her and the generations to come. And it's set in a number of different locations: Sri Lanka, Singapore, New Zealand, Australia, and London, apparently. Yes, another relatively unknown book. I'm going to have to look into that a little bit more because I don't really get a feel for what it's going to be like. Is it going to be concentrating on that initial event? Is that just a jumping off point and the book is so much more than that? Who knows? I would like to find out a bit more about it before I make any judgments. The next one, Crooked Seeds by Karen Jennings. This one is set in post-apartheid South Africa. It's apparently a novel about national trauma and collective guilt. And so the main character, Deirdre, the way that she sees herself is kind of as a victim. So she feels like she's a victim of her family, of society, of history. And then one day the police take her back to her family home where she grew up. And it turns out that there are bodies buried in the land and they've been there for decades. She then has to confront all of these kind of questions about her family. The police are trying to interview her, trying to dig a little bit deeper into what happened. How much does she know? And it's about how she then has to kind of confront the past and, you know, face up to her memories. And it sounds like a very interesting book. The synopsis on the Women's Prize website was all over the place and it wasn't clear exactly what was happening. I was talking about Deirdre living in self-imposed squalor. It's not clear exactly what her circumstances are or what she has to do, or what kind of circumstances she's living in. I feel like there's a lot more information I could have, and I actually, when I read the synopsis on Goodreads, I did get a bit more information and I was kind of a little bit more intrigued because obviously we're asking, you know, I had a lot more questions. And what makes you want to read a book is trying to get your questions answered. Where's this going to go? What story is being told here? If you just use a few buzzwords like, you know, exploration of memories and the past and things like that, it could be any book that you're talking about. But this sounds like it's got a lot to say about South African history and politics, kind of themes of victimhood and culpability, and yeah. So it sounds like it's going to have some heavy themes in there, and whether or not it will work will depend on kind of how it's tackled. Finally, and this is the book that I'm least likely to read just because it's not a standalone book, I don't think. Well, it might be a standalone book, but it's part of kind of an already existing bookiverse, as it were. So that's Tell Me Everything by Elizabeth Strout, and apparently she's written a whole load of books set in Maine, and then there's kind of different series where the characters like meet each other, and so there's the Olive Kitteridge series, which I actually have the first one of, but then there's the Lucy Barton character, who I've heard of as well, who apparently is a writer. She's in this book as well. It sounds like there's this whole metaverse that you probably need to know in order to get the most out of this sort of book. And if I have to read about 5 books first in order to get the most out of a book, I'm probably just not going to bother unless it's something I really want to read. So if it's like a fantasy series, or if it's like a murder mystery series that I simply have to get my hands on, I probably will go for it. But when it comes to, you know, I've got quite a lot to get through. So unless I'm really, really enthused, I'm probably not going to not going to be reading this one. They almost got me. So the blurb starts off with hopeful healing novel, at which point I'm like, right, nope, that's me out. I don't want anything hopeful or healing. I've just read a couple of hopeful healing books and I am, no, bored to tears. I don't want to read anything else cheerful ever again. Low stakes, no, I want some high stakes. Not too high, middling stakes. But then they got me. They were like, oh, Bob Burgess is defending a man accused of killing his mother. Murder mystery. They added some murder in. I get excited. And then it starts talking about how he meets all the friends from new friendships, old loves. And I'm out again. I need some plot. Guys, I need some plot. I'm just really craving some plot right now. So yeah, those are the books that have been longlisted for the Women's Prize. We will have to wait another month or so to find out who is going to be shortlisted. Should I prioritise these books? Should I prioritise the International Booker Prize books? Can we just pause time and just let me go and sit in a cave for a while with a cup of tea, an endlessly replenishing cup of tea, and read these books? There's always something else being announced the moment I get down to it. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a pleasure, and I will see you soon for another video. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed it, and hopefully see you again. Bye for now.